Lena and Marcus had always believed the night was just the absence of light, nothing more. But the first time they saw the shadows move on their own, creeping along the walls as if alive, they realized the darkness wasn't empty, it was watching. Every flicker of a lamp, every whisper in the silent rooms told them one thing. Whatever lived in the shadows had already chosen them, and there was no escape. The night was unusually heavy, as if something unseen pressed against the windows and seeped into the walls. I could feel it long before I noticed anything strange, a weight in the air that made my chest tighten with every breath. The street outside was quiet, almost too quiet, as though the world itself had stopped moving. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small lamp glowing on the nightstand. Its soft light reached the edges of the room but seemed unable to push back the shadows completely. They lingered in the corners like thick pools of ink, unmoving yet alive. I told myself it was just exhaustion, a byproduct of sleepless nights and long days. But no matter how I tried to rationalize the unease, the feeling persisted. It wasn't like the normal fear of the dark I had known as a child. This was something different. This darkness felt aware, as if it noticed me just as much as I noticed it. Every time I glanced toward the corner of the room, I swore the shadows shifted, pulling tighter, darker, like they were breathing. The silence in the apartment was unbearable. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the building settling. But those sounds only emphasized the stillness pressing in all around me. I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling endlessly, but even the glow of the screen seemed to do little to comfort me. It felt like something just beyond the edges of vision was waiting for me to put it down, waiting for me to close my eyes. When I finally lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my body refused to relax. Every sound made me flinch. My own breathing felt too loud, echoing in the small room. I thought about leaving the lamp on all night, but the idea made me feel weak, childish. Instead, I reached over, clicked it off, and let the darkness rush in. That was my first mistake. Instantly, the air in the room changed. It wasn't just darker. It was heavier, thicker, almost tangible. My eyes strained to adjust, but the blackness refused to yield. The shadows in the corners seemed to swell, reaching across the floor like spilled ink. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that fear was exaggerating everything, but my body didn't believe the lies my mind whispered. My skin prickled with cold sweat, and the hair on my arms stood on end. Minutes dragged by, stretching into what felt like hours. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, listening to the silence. That was when I heard a faint sound, so soft I thought I had imagined it. A slow, dragging noise, like something heavy sliding across the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. I wanted to reach for the lamp, but I couldn't move. Fear routed me to the bed, every muscle locked in place. The air in the room felt colder, sharper, biting into my skin. My eyes darted to the far corner, the darkest one, the place where the sound had come from. It was darker than the rest of the room, impossibly black, like a hole had opened in the world and swallowed the light. I stared into that corner until my eyes watered, desperate to see something, anything, that would prove it was just a trick of my imagination. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became that something was there, crouched in the shadows, watching me. The dragging sound came again, louder this time, as if whatever it was had inched closer. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. All I could do was lie there, frozen, staring at the suffocating darkness that pressed against me. The sound stopped once more, but the silence that followed was even worse. I don't know how long I stayed like that, awake and trembling. Eventually, exhaustion must have pulled me into shallow, restless sleep, though the fear never left. And just before I drifted off, I felt a shift in the air at the edge of my bed, the faintest stir against my skin, as if something unseen had moved closer, crouching in the darkness just inches away. The next night came faster than I wanted, and dread weighed heavily on me from the moment the sun began to sink. I tried to busy myself with anything that might keep my mind distracted: music, television, even cleaning the apartment until my hands ached. But no matter what I did, my attention kept slipping back to the corners of the room, to the way the shadows seemed to thicken as the daylight faded. It was as though the dark was already waiting for me, patient and certain that I had nowhere to hide. I promised myself I would not turn off the lamp again. That small, warm glow had been the only thing standing between me and the suffocating blackness that had crawled into my room the night before. As midnight approached, I sat on my bed with the lamp shining beside me, trying to convince myself that the presence I had felt had been nothing more than exhaustion and paranoia. But deep down, I knew better. The memory of that dragging sound still clung to me like a stain that couldn't be washed away. The lamp flickered once, a quick, harmless blink. My breath caught in my throat, but when the light held steady, I forced a shaky laugh, pretending it was nothing more than faulty wiring. A few minutes later, it flickered again, longer this time, casting strange, twisting shapes across the walls. The shadows stretched unnaturally, bending in ways that didn't match the furniture, as though they had their own will. My heart hammered in my chest and I found myself staring at the bulb, silently begging it not to go out. Then came the sound, the dragging. Louder now, more deliberate, as if whatever had crept in the night before had grown bolder. The noise scraped across the floor, slow and steady, circling the room in a path I couldn't trace. My body stiffened, and every instinct screamed for me to stay still, to not draw attention. My eyes darted toward the corner again, and I felt my blood run cold. The darkness there was thicker than it should have been, darker than the rest of the room. It pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing. My lamp flickered again, weaker this time, its light fading with each blink. Each time it dimmed, the corner seemed to swell, stretching further across the floor, creeping toward the bed where I sat frozen in terror. I thought of grabbing my phone, but I was too afraid to look away. The screen wouldn't have been enough to fight the blackness anyway. The dragging grew closer, the sound scratching along the floorboards, until I swore it was only feet away. I pressed myself back against the headboard, my fingers gripping the blanket so tightly that my knuckles ached. The lamp sputtered once more and then went out completely. My room was swallowed in total darkness, the kind that felt alive, the kind that pressed against my eyes and lungs, suffocating me. For a moment, there was only silence. Then I heard it breathing, not mine, a low, uneven sound, close, far too close, far too close. I clenched my jaw, my teeth chattering despite the effort to stay quiet. The breathing shifted, circling me, brushing faintly against my ear, as though something invisible had leaned in to listen. My skin crawled, goosebumps spreading across every inch of me. I didn't dare move, I didn't dare scream. Every sound in that room belonged to it now. Seconds felt like hours. My eyes burned from straining into the darkness, but no matter how I tried I could see nothing. And yet I knew it was there, standing just outside the reach of my senses, watching me, waiting. The dragging sound returned, this time at the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped ever so slightly, as if unseen weight had pressed against it. My breath caught in my throat, and a wave of panic surged through me, but I still couldn't move. Then came the cold. A sharp, icy chill spread across my skin as something unseen brushed against my arm. It was no longer a distant threat hiding in the shadows. It was here, beside me, real and undeniable. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. The breathing grew louder, heavier, filling the room with its steady rhythm. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But fear had chained me in place, every muscle locked tight. My eyes watered, my chest ached, and still I stayed still, frozen in terror. And then, in that suffocating blackness, I felt it lean closer, close enough that its breath tickled the side of my face. The silence between us was unbearable. That was when I realized the truth. I wasn't alone in the dark anymore. The dark itself was alive, and it was pressing closer, inch by inch, until I could no longer tell where my body ended and its presence began. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and dread. I no longer thought about work or errands or anything that had once felt important. My entire world narrowed to one fear: what waited for me when the lights went out. Sleep became impossible. I tried to nap during the day, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt the same chilling awareness, the same certainty that something waited just beyond my vision. Even sunlight offered no comfort. The corners of every room seemed too deep, too black, as if the shadows were thicker where I stood. I started to wonder if I carried the darkness with me. When I left my apartment to walk the streets, the presence followed. At first I told myself it was paranoia, but then the streetlights proved me wrong. They dimmed as I passed beneath them, their glow sputtering, until I was left in patches of near darkness. Each time it happened, I felt it cold air brushing my skin, like something unseen was reaching for me. I would whip around, heart hammering, only to find empty sidewalks stretching in both directions. The stillness mocked me, but deep down I knew I wasn't imagining it. The shadows clung to me no matter where I went. Friends noticed the changes. They told me I looked pale, sick, that I needed rest. I wanted to tell them the truth, but how could I? How could I explain that the dark itself had become my enemy, that it breathed and moved and followed me? Instead, I lied. I smiled, nodded, and let them think I was simply overworked. But when night fell, I begged to stay at their houses, desperate for a reprieve from my apartment. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the thing would not follow me into someone else's home. I was wrong. The first night I stayed at a friend's house, I made them leave every lamp on. The soft glow calmed me, even if only a little. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, forcing myself to believe the light would hold. Hours passed in silence, and I finally began to drift into uneasy sleep. Then, at some unholy hour, the power went out. I woke instantly to a suffocating blanket of darkness. The familiar pressure returned, heavy and undeniable. I grabbed my phone, desperate for its glow, but the screen stayed black no matter how many times I pressed it. Panic swelled in my chest. The house that had felt warm and safe just hours earlier now stretched wide and unfamiliar, as though the walls had shifted in the dark. The sound came again, the dragging, louder than ever, scratching along the floor, circling the couch. My breath caught as the noise grew closer, moving slowly, deliberately, as though savoring my terror. I clutched the blanket, pulling it tightly around me, though I knew it offered no protection. The sound scraped around the room, closer, then farther, then close again, never stopping, never resting. I shut my eyes, trembling, but that made it worse. In the pitch black behind my eyelids, I felt it even stronger. The cold air thickened, brushing over my face, my arms, my legs, like invisible hands pressing against me. My throat closed up, my body refusing to scream, even as terror consumed me. The dragging stopped. Silence pressed in, deafening and absolute. I held my breath, praying it had gone, that maybe it had retreated into some unseen corner. But then I felt it cold and unmistakable. Something brushed against my ankle. The touch was light, almost curious, but it shot terror through me like a blade. I kicked instinctively, pulling my legs onto the couch, curling into a ball, but the contact lingered in my mind like a burn that would never fade. I stayed like that until morning, wide-eyed, unable to move. When the sun finally rose and the lights flickered back on, I expected relief, but none came. The shadows still seemed wrong, darker in places they shouldn't be. My phone, dead the entire night, blinked to life as though nothing had happened. My friend found me shaking, pale, drenched in sweat, but I couldn't explain. What could I say that their home had been invaded by something that lived in the dark, something that touched me while I slept? Even in daylight, I knew the truth. There was no escaping it. The darkness wasn't bound to my apartment, or to the night. It was bound to me. It followed wherever I went, feeding on the fear it created. And no matter how many lights I surrounded myself with, I could feel it waiting, patient and relentless, for the moment the darkness would return. I began to lose pieces of myself to the fear. Days slipped away in a blur, and I couldn't remember when I had last eaten a proper meal or spoken to someone without trembling. My body felt weak, my mind clouded, but I couldn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, the dragging sound returned in memory, and I would jolt awake before sleep could claim me. I knew I couldn't survive much longer like this, so I threw myself into searching for answers. I scoured books, forums, and any obscure corner of the internet that might explain what was happening. Most of what I found was nonsense ghost stories, urban legends, fragments of folklore twisted into entertainment. But every now and then I came across whispers of something older, something described not as a spirit or a demon, but as the dark itself given form. One name surfaced again and again, buried in half-forgotten texts. The Hollow. It was never seen directly, only felt, only heard. It didn't visit houses or haunt specific places. It followed people. Once it found you, it clung to you until the fear it fed on consumed you entirely. The thought made my stomach turn, but at the same time, it explained everything. The flickering lights, the breath on my skin, the dragging sound that circled my bed. It wasn't trying to scare me by accident. It wanted me afraid. My terror was what it lived on. Knowing this didn't make me safer, it only made me desperate. I filled my apartment with light lamps in every corner, candles covering every table, flashlights set in rows along the floor. For a while it gave me comfort. The shadows retreated, pressed back into the smallest cracks, leaving me with a fragile illusion of safety. I convinced myself that as long as the light burned, I could hold it at bay. But light is fragile. Fire burns down, bulbs die, electricity falters. On the third night of my new defenses, I sat in the middle of my glowing apartment, surrounded by a halo of light. I told myself it couldn't reach me, that I had won. Hours passed in silence, and for a moment I almost believed it. Then every bulb shattered at once. The sound was deafening, like 100 tiny explosions. Glass rained down across the room, catching the glow of the candles for one last moment, before the flames flickered violently and then went out. One by one the candles died as if an invisible breath had extinguished them. Within seconds my fortress of light was destroyed. The darkness came rushing back, thicker than ever. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the thunder of my heartbeat. Then, almost immediately, the dragging sound began. Louder than before. Closer, it scraped across the floor with furious intent, circling me, tightening its path with each pass. I pressed myself against the wall, curling into myself, every nerve in my body screaming to run but knowing there was nowhere left to go. The sound stopped in front of me. I could feel an oppressive cold pressing against my chest, as if something leaned close, savoring the fear radiating off me. My throat went dry. I wanted to shout, to beg it to leave me, but no words would come. The room pulsed with darkness, as though it had weight and mass, filling every inch of space until there was no room left for air. I gasped, but breathing felt impossible, as if the dark itself was pressing into my lungs. Then I felt it. Fingers impossibly cold, brushing against my neck. The touch was gentle, almost tender, but it carried with it a promise that froze me to my core. This thing wasn't going to vanish with daylight. It wasn't going to let me escape. It had chosen me, and it would not stop until I was entirely its own. I stayed frozen, paralyzed by its touch, waiting for the end. But instead of claiming me then and there, it pulled back. The dragging sound retreated into the distance, fading until silence reclaimed the room. I sat there in the dark, shaking, drenched in sweat, realizing with bone-deep dread that it was playing with me. It didn't need to rush. It could take me whenever it wanted, and it wanted me to know that. I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds, warm and golden, a cruel contrast to the terror that had ruled my nights. For a moment, relief washed over me, and I almost believed it had all been a dream. The dragging sounds, the breath on my skin, the unending darkness. My apartment looked normal, peaceful even. The corners were just corners, the shadows soft and lifeless. I took a shaky breath, telling myself I had survived, that maybe it had left me after all. But the relief didn't last. I noticed the corners first. They weren't right, not completely. The sunlight hit them, and yet they clung to a darkness that shouldn't exist. Shadows so deep they seemed to swallow light. My stomach knotted as I realized it wasn't the room that had changed, it was me. I had changed. My body felt foreign, hollowed out by exhaustion. My eyes darting to the corners again and again, searching for something I couldn't name. The mirror reflected my fear back at me. For a moment, I thought it was normal, just me, pale and shaken from the long nights. But then my reflection moved differently, ever so slightly. It lingered on my face, smiling faintly when I hadn't smiled at all. A chill ran down my spine. I leaned closer, gripping the edges of the dresser. The reflection remained still, almost deliberate in its delay, as if it was aware in a way I wasn't. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that the sleep deprivation and terror had made me see things that weren't real. But deep down, I knew better. I had felt the darkness, its fingers brushing against my skin, its cold breath crawling over me, the dragging sound circling my bed like a predator. I had lived through it, and it had left traces behind, impossible to erase. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe too loudly, for fear it would notice I was awake. And then I heard it, the dragging, soft at first, from beneath the bed. My heart slammed against my chest. I wanted to call out, to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. The sound circled slowly, deliberate, teasing, and I realized with growing horror that it wasn't just under the bed. It was everywhere, surrounding me, filling the room with its presence. The sunlight seemed to dim as I watched. Shadows creeping again along the floor, pooling unnaturally at the edges. I backed against the wall, eyes fixed on the mirror, and saw it, my reflection stepping forward. Not my reflection, exactly, but something wearing my face. Its movements were fluid, controlled, deliberate, its eyes entirely black, like pits that consumed the light around them. My breath caught in my throat. Panic surged, but I couldn't move. The thing in the mirror reached out its hand, pressing its palm against the glass. And for a moment I felt it touch me, cold and unyielding, fingers ghosting along my skin. I staggered back, heart hammering, and the reflection smiled, just faintly, as if satisfied. The dragging sound grew louder, now accompanied by whispers I couldn't understand, voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I tried to cover my ears, but it seeped in anyway, twisting and gnawing at my mind. The walls of the room stretched impossibly, and the sunlight shrank into faint streaks, unable to hold the darkness at bay. I realized the terrible truth in that moment. It wasn't that the darkness had entered my world. I had entered its world. Every light I had relied on was an intruder here, temporary and weak. The blackness was patient, eternal, and it had been waiting for me to understand my place within it. I ran, though I had nowhere to go. My reflection followed, stepping out of the mirror fully now, moving toward me with deliberate certainty. The dragging sound roared around the room, surrounding me, tightening its grip on the edges of my sanity. I screamed, finally, but my voice seemed muffled, swallowed by the thick air that pressed against me from all sides. And then the sunlight vanished completely, the room swallowed by black that had no bottom, no edges, no escape. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was my own face. No, not meaner version of me with eyes made entirely of shadows, stepping forward with slow, unstoppable certainty. The air pressed down harder, colder, and I realized there was no waking from this. I had become part of the darkness, and yet, somehow, I was still here, trapped between what was real and what the darkness demanded. The dragging sound continued, and the whispering began anew, endless, patient, and hungry. Somewhere in the void, I felt it smile.